Alrighty. So this, when you open up Unity in a new 3D project, this is what you will be shown. Sorry, this. That was the game tab. We'll talk about that in a second. So Unity, at first glance, is actually kind of scary looking. There's a lot of things on the screen, albeit not that much, but it's very powerful in what it can do. So as long as you know what everything does, you can access all sorts of different parts of your project at any point. So first things first, the very center of the screen, the thing you have here is called the scene view. This is literally what the game looks like in the editor. Inside here, you can go ahead and hold the right mouse button down to pan around and look. You can also scroll in and scroll out to zoom. You can use, I believe, the arrow keys to kind of fly in the direction at which you're facing. That's kind of helpful sometimes. And you can also, oh, am I stuck? I think I'm stuck. There is a pan if you click with the middle mouse button, but for some reason it doesn't like me right now. All right, anyway, we're okay. So, okay, cool. Well, interesting. So on the left side here, we have what's called the scene hierarchy. So every object or item that is placed in your scene will be displayed here with the names that you can give it, or there's like a little object symbol here that it basically just represents that it's an object. On the bottom side here, we have the project folder. So basically, this is the folder that is inside your folder that you selected to initialize the project in. You already have a folder in here called the scenes folder. For the most part, when you make Unity games, we like to make a bunch of folders in here called like materials or prefabs or scripts to put all of your code in and whatnot. That can be done a little bit later. For now, I'm just going to leave it blank. So on the right side of the screen, we have what's called the inspector. When you select an object in the scene, like let's say I want to create, no, I'll do that in a second. Let's say I want to click the camera, or the light, actually. So if I click the light in the scene hierarchy on the left, on the right side, we will see everything that the light, or every component that the light has attached to it. So we understand that it has a transform. So a transform is basically where the object is in a scene, the way it's rotated, the scale that it is. All of those wonderful things are in the transform component. It also has, obviously, the light component. This is totally editable. There's a whole bunch of crazy stuff you can do, but we're not really worried about that right now. So the light has a transform, which is its location, and the light component that emits light from this object. Pretty simple. Now, we want to go ahead, let's see, I showed you this. So in the hierarchy on the left side, we can do this really fancy thing to create objects quickly. So we can right-click, and then we can scroll down to a 3D object. And I want to put some ground in my scene, because if we don't put any ground, we won't have anything to walk on, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go with a cube. And now we have a cube in our scene. Very nice. This cube, I'm going to actually put him back where he was. Closer to like, whoop, I deleted him. That's actually, you know what? We'll pull him in. All right. So this is our cube. Here he is. He's in the scene. Oh, now I can pan. What the heck? All right, anyway. So here's our cube. It's in the scene. I'm going to bring it a little lower. We can now change this, because obviously that's kind of a tiny piece of ground, right? So we're going to make that a lot bigger. By going over here into the transform, we can take a closer look at the scale variable underneath the transform component. So instead, I'm going to make it 10 and 10. Oh, sorry, that's a 0. 10 and 10 in the X and the Z. And with a 1 in the Y, it's a pretty thick ground too. I'll lower it a little bit. And there we go. So now we have a ground plane. Nice and easy. Everyone good so far? All right. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'll get you as soon as I notice. All right, so we created our ground. Now we're going to talk about something else that's actually pretty important here, called the game preview. So if you look up at the top of your scene view here, there should be another tab called the game. If you click it, you'll be able to see what is seen by the camera itself. So basically, if you go back in your scene here and you click the main camera, if you drag it around, in the bottom right corner of the screen, you can see a little preview of what the camera sees. So I can pull it back and forth. I can raise it up a little bit more. Maybe I'll use one of the tools in the top left corner, the rotate tool, that looks like two arrows, like the yin and yang symbol. And I'll grab one of the axes here, probably the red one, and I'll drag it down. So now if I go back to the move, our camera is functioning on a little bit of a different plane. And we can go back to the game preview, and now it looks a little bit different, right? So something helpful that you might want to take note of while you're doing some like lower level stuff in Unity is you can take this game preview and drag it out. You can undock it to wherever you want. So usually when I'm working at home, I have it on a second monitor or something like that. But usually if I'm on my laptop, I like to put it in the bottom right corner. You can drag it out a little bit, make the dock a little bit taller, a little bit wider, and now you can see more of the game. Everyone good with that? So far, so good? All right, cool. So moving along, we also want to go ahead and set up, actually not here. So we go ahead and run the game, right? Nothing happens. It's just blank, except the projector shaking, but that's Steven's. Anyway, so if you run the game right now, nothing happens, but you can see the camera preview that you created, right? So obviously, we kind of need something here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go on to the left, and we are going to right-click, create a new 3D object, and for our player character, we're going to go ahead and make another cube. Or actually, we'll be exciting. We'll make a sphere. So here's our sphere. There he is in the scene. He's living. But if we go ahead and run the game again, and it'll maximize for me, nothing happens. Nothing is affecting the sphere at all. It's just a blank object in the scene. So how do we make it do stuff? We need to understand what's called components in Unity. This is basically like when you apply events to something on scripts in GameMaker, you can apply components that do different things in Unity. It's a little bit different because you are in 3D space, and the engine works a little bit differently, so it's going to take a little bit for you to understand the differences. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a component onto the sphere, but before I do that, I'm going to rename it to player, because I don't want to keep looking at sphere. On the top right in the inspector, you can name things different things, so I'm going to go ahead and change the cube to ground too, just for safekeeping. And go ahead and save this, Control S, as you should do all the time. All right, so now we're back to our player. If we scroll down, there's a button called Add Component. We're going to go ahead and click that button, and thank you, autocomplete. As you can see, there's a lot of built-in Unity things that you can take advantage of. But obviously, we're only going to be gunning for the ones that we know we need. So right now, we're going to go ahead and take advantage of the rigid body, R-I-G-I-D-B-O-D-Y. We're going to go ahead and click Enter when we have it selected, or you can click it, and it will apply to the object that we have selected. Right? So now we have our rigid body. Cool. Now that the rigid body is applied to the player, let's run the game again and see what happens. Huh. The ball fell. Nice. We're getting somewhere now. So now, with the rigid body component on the player, the built-in Unity physics engine is now taking charge of how the ball moves. The base physics engine, all that it's doing right now is just putting gravity on top of you. And that's it. That's all it's doing. So now that we have a rigid body and the ball is able to be affected by base physics, we can go ahead and add some code onto that. But before we do that, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, come again? Unity's doing what? Okay, so if I'll have Tarquin take a look. If he, my best guess is you probably put negative gravity on the rigid body or something like that?
Oh, no, your ball's not falling up. Your ground is falling down.
That's going in the uncut version. Okay, so assumedly, if his ground is falling, that also means that the ground has the rigid body component on it. You can fix that really easy. Tarquin's gonna help you. Okay. So, I almost had a heart attack. I've never had anyone tell me, unless they're working in Game Maker, that something's falling up. So, crap, man. All right, so now, if your ball is falling down and the ground stays in place, and the ball hits the ground and it stays, we're all in the same spot. All right, are we all good other than that? We're all in somewhat the same space. Okay, so actually before we do some coding, because this is going to get a little hazy on the eyes, we're going to go ahead and give our, do we want to give our player or the ground some color? Because we're going to do both, but which do we do first? Because I have to show you how to do it. The ground? We'll do the ground first. All right, so we're going to pick a nice ugly color for the ground, but in order to do that, we have to apply a material to the shape that we're applying it to, right? So if we go onto the bottom in our little project folder window here, we can right-click, create a material. So it's going to be a tad of the ways down from the top, just about halfway through the box. A create material. So we're going to go ahead and click that, and we're going to name it ground material, or whatever you like. And now, inside this material, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a sphere. That is the preview image for the material that you're applying. This works for all sorts of different things, maps that you apply to like player models and walls and stuff like that. This is all going to be shown on the sphere. And now you can change that by clicking the one of these little buttons here, and you can go through all the shapes that Unity has pre-built in. But usually I like the sphere because it has a nice amount of light that hits it, and you can see it from all angles. All right, so the simplest way to apply something as a material is to just change the albedo color. So we're going to go ahead and click the little white box with the little eyedropper, and it'll bring up a color wheel. Now, I like colors, but I'm going to try not to make it too ugly. So starting from red, I'm going to go for like something like a little bit like a brown maybe. I think brown should be good for the ground. It's a little red, but it's there. Huh? Like this, yeah? All right, so that's a little bit more brown, right? So this is our ground material. And once you've picked your favorite color, you can go ahead and drag the material from the project window onto an object in the scene. This can also be done with other objects. Nice and easy. So we'll drop it on the ground. And I think the white difference from the brown actually should be fine enough for me. So I'm going to leave it like that. If you guys want to add a color to your player instead, you can always go ahead and do that by doing the exact same thing, but instead of dragging the color material onto the ground, you just drag it onto the player. Simple enough. Alrighty. So is everyone here? Does everyone have a ball, a ground, and some stuff? We're all good? Anyone? Am I missing anyone? All right, cool. So moving along, we're going to go ahead. And obviously, the ball is our player, but as of right now, it doesn't do much. He just falls. So we need to write some code that's going to make the ball do something. So we're going to go ahead and right-click in our assets folder here, and we're going to create a C# script. The second one from the top. And I'm going to call it character controller. And then I'm going to go ahead and double-click it, and it should open up Visual Studio. Now, if your computer gives you some sort of wacky thing like, you know, enable your license or some doodad like that, just sign into your Google account if you have a Gmail, and then it should be okay. You don't have to like make a separate account for this. But let me know if that stops you guys. I'm going to have to go ahead and add this too. Okay, so we now have Visual Studio open. Ooh. There we go. Look okay? Cool. All right. So Visual Studio is now open. Raise your hand if you're not here yet.
Will VS Code work?
Yes. Any editor is fine. I just happen to use Visual Studio because that's what I've been using since I learned Unity.
You have to make new adjustments for
Yeah. If you set it up with it already, then more power to you. But for the most part, it's all going to be the same thing. You can literally open up these scripts in like Sublime and change them, and it'll work. Ta-da. As long as all your syntax is correct. All right. So when you're first seeing this, it's, again, a little bit frightening. So we're going to go through it. It's pretty simple. Basically, you don't even have to look. I don't even use half the buttons up here in the toolbar. Basically, all you need to know is that this right here, this little blue looking like it's highlighted box, that's the current script we're working on. When you have a lot of scripts open, they'll open up new tabs here. And then at the top is basically how you're working in C#, the name of the script, and I think this is like one of the, okay, it's a navigation. Anyway, it'll come with some of these baseline using Unity system stuff. You want to leave that alone for the most part. Sometimes you'll add one or two using scripts, but for the most part, it's going to stay the same. The next thing you'll see is your class, which is the name of your script, and that it extends mono behavior. This, again, is going to be pretty much the same for the most part. Unity, we're kind of like in the middle of updating to like a new like way that Unity works, but we'll get into that later. Basically, all you need to know is inside this class is where all the code that you're going to write is going to be written. So first things first, we kind of need a movement speed, right? Like as we saw in GameMaker, you can't really do much unless you initialize some variables that the player can use. So first things first, I'm going to create a movement speed. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a public float variable called move speed. And we're going to set it equal to, we'll say 5f for now. Or actually, I'm going to go 10f. Now, at first, I'm sure this is really, oh God, what is this? But basically, all you need to know is that when you're in a language like this, such as C# or like any C-based language, you have what's called, or Java too, public and private variables. When something is public in Unity, that allows you to change it from the inspector. So if I just did this right now, right, just public float move speed 10. If I applied this component or this new script, which is a component to an object, we can then go into the script in the inspector, change the movement speed, and thus it would be applied throughout everything we do on that object. Pretty cool, right? So that's all you need to know. Public is variables that you want to change in the inspector, and private is ones that you want to store inside the script and not allow to be changed in the inspector. That's pretty much it. There's also like some interclass nonsense, but that's a little past this. A little past my pay grade. So, next thing we probably want, as we saw in our other platformer, we want to jump, right? We want to be able to jump so we can actually perform platforming actions. So we're going to make ourselves a public float jump speed. And we're also going to set that to 10. Oh, I realize I didn't explain what the F means. Basically, if you understand variable types, a float is basically a number with a decimal point after it. So if you just put F, then it means it's 10.0. That's pretty much it. That's all you gotta know. Just know if you're using numbers, you probably want to use floats. And if you're using floats, the number has to end in a lowercase f. That's just how it is. Yeah, well, yeah, if you use, that's just how it is in Unity. Okay, so moving along, the next thing that we need to do is actually something a little bit more complicated, but we need to have access to one of the pieces of our object. So we're going to make this one a private, And the type that it is a component that is already applied to the object called the rigid body. So we're going to make a private rigid body variable, and we'll just call it RB. If you go out and watch other Unity tutorials, literally everyone names it this way. But usually, you can either make it a public or private. Public would just mean you have to assign it yourself in the inspector. But for this case, I'm just going to use one line of code that grabs the rigid body off of the object. Simple enough. Okay. I can show you how to do both ways. It's super simple. And then we need one more thing, and this is going to come in for later. I'm going to create a variable called public float turn speed. And we're going to set that to 5f, half of our movement speed. All right, so we have a couple different variables here, and they're all going to be used later when we actually implement some of the functions. But for now, this is fine how it is, and I need the f. All right, so inside the start function, this is kind of how the majority of Unity scripts work. The start is kind of like the create event in GameMaker. It runs once when the script starts up, and that's it. It's just the initializer. The update is going to run every frame of the game, and that's where we are going to be handling all of our physics manipulation and stuff. So inside start, when this script starts, we're going to want to actually create a value for our RB, or our rigid body variable. So we're going to say RB equals, and we're going to call a function called getComponent, and then we're going to use the open and close gator mouths, I guess they'll call them. Angle brackets. Sorry. They're gator mouths, okay? And inside the angle brackets, we want to use the type of component that we're looking for. So we're going to give it the rigid body, because that's what we want. And then an open close paren and a semicolon to end the line. Simple. Just a quick little one-line trick to keep the rigid body variable private so that the player, when you're editing things in the inspector, you don't accidentally assign something to the rigid body component. Okay, so moving along. Now we're actually going to, we'll come back here, but I'm going to leave a comment for later. Right jump function. That's where I'm going to put that, but that's for later. All right, so first things first, we're going to go into our update. And inside update, there's some stuff that we need to do. So usually what you want to do is, to extrapolate this to a little bit of a higher level, you'll want to, write functions that handle all of your inputs and stuff, and then those functions can just shuffle all of what they got into functions later on that do some of the physics stuff, and some of my friends will be seeing that later on. But for now, I'm literally just going to handle all of it like we would have done in a step event in GameMaker. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable. This is going to be called float. Float move forward. And that float move forward is going to be set equal to input.getAxis, in quotes, vertical. Now I know, again, that's probably really scary, but it's actually really simple. We created a float, which is just a number like we used earlier. We're going to be setting it equal to some built-in Unity stuff. So basically what we're doing is we're finding the input, which is something built into Unity. We're using a function called getAxis, which is also built into Unity. The getAxis function allows us to access some of the built-in, some of the project-specific settings that you can make for your game. So basically what it's saying is input.getAxis vertical. The vertical axis, by Unity's standards, is the W and the S key, or the up and the down key on the keyboard. And I can show you guys where that is in just a second. So what we're doing is we're just grabbing the value of the positive and the negative of W and S, or up and down. And I'm going to go ahead and show you where that is right now. So if we go back into Unity real quick, it's going to do like a little stutter because it needs to resave the project that you were working on in Visual Studio. If you go ahead and go up into Edit on the top left, scroll down to Project Settings, you'll see, I'm going to maximize this window. You'll see on the left side we have a tab called Input. And if you drop down the axes, you have access to the horizontal and the vertical. And wouldn't you know, vertical is the keyword that I used, and the negative button is down, the positive button is up, and the alternatives are S and W. Does that make sense to everyone? Cool. All right. So now if we go back into our code, we now have access to the whether or not the player is pressing up or down on the keyboard. The next thing we want to do is we're going to create something for later. We're going to create something called a vector3, and I'm just going to name it facing. And I'm going to set it equal to the transform.forward. This is, again, something for later. I can come back and explain this when we need it. So just go ahead and type that in, vector3, name it something, and we're going to set it equal to transform.forward. I'm sure you're confused. It'll become all apparent in just a second. So the next thing we're going to do, because we're in a 3D space, we need to use these things called vector 3s. Vector 3s have 3 values, an x, a y, a z. And now you can set those values of vector 3s to, you can set them to other numbers, and then you can use that vector and apply it to the rigid body as a force. You kind of see what we're getting at now? We're building vectors to apply as forces on top of the rigid bodies. It'll all make sense in just a second. So next thing we're going to have to do is we need to make another vector 3. And I'm going to call this one movement, because this is going to be the vector that carries what I want to do to the player object. This movement vector is going to be a new vector 3. And inside this vector 3, we're going to take our move forward and multiply it by the facing variable .x component. Going word by word here. Comma, followed by a 0.0f. That is just 0, and it's a float. And the last one is going to be our move forward variable, or excuse me, our move forward float. And we want the We want the move forward float, and we're going to multiply it by the facing .z component. Okay? All right. So I'm going to take a moment to explain that. We're creating a new vector 3, and we are populating it with the value in the x that we want to travel and the value in the z that we want to travel. This is all going to be determined by the way that the character object is facing. So if you can imagine this for a second, I'm programming tank controls. So you can move forward and back, but only in the direction that you're facing forwards. Is that clear? Kinda? All right. Once again, it'll make sense once it's actually going on the game. So the next thing we're going to do, now that we have all these vectors, we have to apply them to our object. What better way to do that than applying the forces to the physics component that the object has? So we're going to find one of our old friends, RB, and we're going to say rb.addForce. This is a built-in function. It uses this to apply vectors to rigid bodies, which becomes force. Wow. Great. All right. So we're going to say rb.addForce, and we're going to use that movement vector from before, and we're going to now multiply it by the move speed that we created earlier. Because when you make this vector, the move forward float for the vertical value is only going to be a plus or a minus 1. And that's too small to even move the object in Unity. So we have to multiply it by the speed that we gave it so that we actually travel somewhere. All right? So the next thing that'll go here is I'll put the jump check. But again, we'll do that in a second. And the last thing we're going to do is implement how we turn. So we're going to go ahead and create another float, and I'm going to call it turn horizontal. Or you know what? I'm just going to call it turn. Float turn. And we're going to make that equal to input dot get axis. And can anyone guess which axis goes here? Perfect. The horizontal axis. Now, can anyone take a wild guess and tell me why I used the horizontal axis? If you think back earlier when I went back into Unity. If the vertical axis means the up, down, and S and W keys, go ahead. Perfect. Perfect. So basically, the horizontal axes represent left and right, and A and D on the keyboard. Of course, you can change these to how you feel, and they are unique per Unity project, but it is what you make them. They do have defaults that you'll see when you go in there, but you can feel free to make them whatever you like, of course, if you're using a keyboard. Controllers are a bit of a different story. And the last thing that we're going to do, now that we have this axis, how do we change the way that we're facing? So we're going to type in transform dot rotate. This is a built-in function for the transform component that we have applied to our player object that should be applied to every object in your Unity scene. Transform.rotate is basically going to take, I believe, a vector 3, and we are going to give it 0 turn times turn speed and 0. Now, to explain why that works, we can't turn on the X and Z axis, because the X and Z axis are what give us access to a straight view. When you tilt on the Z, your view kind of goes like this. When you tilt on the X, it kind of goes like this. But when you tilt on the Y, you rotate like this. And that's what we want to do when our player turns. So that's exactly what this is doing. We do nothing in the X, nothing in the Z, and we do all the turning in the Y. Simple enough, right? So now we're going to go ahead and go back into Unity. Make sure that applied. Now we're going to run the game, right? And when you run the game, oh no, nothing's happening. Did anyone catch my mistake? Not you, Tarquin. Perfect. So what I neglected to do was if we go into our player object here, we don't have the script that we just wrote. Yes? All right, hold on. So I'm going to apply mine. And I'm going to run it. And there should be no compiler errors. I typed it word for word. They got to be missing something. I'll pull it up in a second. But basically, now that we've applied our script, and we're going to leave the move, jump, and turn speed how it is, we're going to go ahead and give this a shot. Ah, it moves. It moves pretty fast, but it moves. Thank you, thank you. All right, so now he just flew off the thing. Cool. So, the next thing that we need to see, let me know when those guys are done. I'll wait a second or so here, because we are missing a couple things. What's up?
Can you show how to apply it again?
I'm sorry?
Can you show how to apply it?
Yes. So what you're going to do is you're going to select your object that you want to apply it to. It should be your player. You're going to go ahead and scroll down, or you don't really have to, and you can literally just click and drag just like you did to the material and apply it here. All good, Tarquin? Cool. Just simple things? Yes. So if you click the object you want to apply it to so that it appears in the inspector on the right side of your screen, you can go into your assets folder, click and drag the script you just wrote, and apply it here. And then you just let go, and it applies. then you should have all of the variables that were public available in the inspector, such as your movement speed and jump speed and turn speed. Okay. Everyone good? Okay, so on the bottom left, there should be a console button. Click it. Bottom left of Unity, there's a console button. Next to project, console, right here.
Everything started with a different layout.
Oh, top left window, layouts. Oh wait, I'm wrong actually, sorry. Default, there you go. I can open up the code again right here. Just for those who maybe might have missed something. But it's just about 40 lines so far, and it all fits on one screen nice and pretty. What's up?
Now that I'm letting me apply to it.
All right. This is a reminder for later. We're going to have to cut out all this dead air. All right. Yep. Can't add script character controller because the script doesn't have. Did it open naturally in the Visual Studio Code? Should be fine. Alright, just close this install. We should try to fix it the way we did. So let's save this here. Oh, okay. Alright, anyone else have problems?
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. We're Jared!
It's for band.
Oh. Oh, listen, I mean, I have problems too, man. Oh, you just can't read that well? Alright, so. See, I believe that happened on mine as well, and I'm not sure why. No, I'm only holding up. So that's the next issue I'd like to figure out. No, this is the exact same code as I wrote last night, so I'm curious as to what I changed. Well, that would make sense. Oh, duh. Okay. To fix all of you people who are having problems with it just rolling back and forth, I know what it is. It's always the stupid thing. So I'm going to show this here. All right. We're resuming. So go back into your player here. And if you scroll down and find the rigid body component, here's what's happening to your sphere. As you tell it to move, the sphere is constantly spinning. Obviously not shown because there's no texture on the sphere. So what you need to do is click the constraints drop down and freeze rotation of all 3 axes.
It would rotate, like he pressed W once and it would just rotate on the x-axis and then move the C.
Okay, so that is one thing. The next thing that you're going to have to do, yeah, I figured I didn't miss anything. All right, so all of the code other than that is the same. So does everyone have that now? Rigid body component on the player, open constraints, and freeze rotation. See, if you had done this on a cube, it would have been much more noticeable because as soon as you held forwards, that thing was flying off into oblivion. And that's how you know. So, freeze your rotation. Yes, what's up? You want to help him over? Okay. So does everyone have the constraints locked now and their sphere should work if they go forward and back and they turn? Cool.
Are you having it change velocity or apply a force?
We're applying a force. Okay, so next thing, we're going to go right back into the code real quick because we're kind of missing something, right? If we're playing a platformer, don't we want to jump? I mean, some people don't. I like jumping. So, okay, so we're going to go ahead first and add the check for when a player presses the jump button. Simple enough. So I'm going to go ahead in my code, and I'm going to say if input.getButtonDown, this is the same thing as getButtonPressed or keyboard check pressed in GameMaker. And we are going to check the button that is linked to the Unity preset jump. By default, this is linked to the spacebar. One more time. We're going to check if the button that is down is the jump button, we are going to do something. And then the Unity default for jump or the jump project preset is the spacebar. Now, inside this function, we are going to call a function that we haven't made yet called jump. Okay. Now Visual Studio Code is going to cry because you haven't written the jump function yet, but we're going to do that right now. Yeah. Lowercase j. Okay. I will later. All right. So we're going to go ahead and go outside of the update function. We're going to write it right in the middle. And we are going to create a function that returns nothing, so void. And we're going to call it void jump. And that is our function definition. It returns nothing, so it's void. And the name of the function is jump. and it doesn't take anything in, so we don't need to put anything in here. And now we get to write the function. Okay? So we're going to create a new vector. As you saw before, we are still working in a 3D space, so we have to make a new 3D space vector, and we're going to call it big jump. So my new big jump vector is going to be a new vector 3, and we are going to apply nothing in the x, so 0.0f. We're going to apply our jump speed in the y, and 0.0f in the z, which means we are literally just jumping vertically. But once we've created that vector, we also need to apply it. So we're going to call upon our good friend RB. We're going to say RB dot add force, like we did for when we were moving. And we are going to apply the big jump vector that we just created. And then we were also going to add an extra little thing on the end called force mode dot velocity change. That should kind of autocorrect for you. So basically all this is doing is it's taking the new vector 3 that we created for a jump, and then we are telling our physics rigid body that we want to apply a velocity change to our object in the form of a jump. Simple enough. And after that's done, and after you have your jump check here in the code, we can go back over to Unity. Make sure that we save to make sure. And as long as you have a move, a jump, and a turn speed on, our player should be able to move forwards and back. I don't want to fall off. Turn left a little bit and go that way. That's a little much. How about this way? No? That way? Okay. And we can jump. Pretty cool. Now you'll also notice you can jump infinitely. That's a really simple fix, just a Boolean. If we're on the ground, can jump. If not, no. Easy. But we'll save that because there is one more thing that I wanted to do. You'll notice that our camera is still stuck in place. Now, I can bore you to death all day about how fancy cameras in Unity work and how great they are and how awesome you can make your games look by using them. But I'm just going to give you the kind of workaround method, kind of. One that you really shouldn't use, but I'm going to use right here anyway. We are going to go ahead and do what's called parenting, like you saw in GameMaker. And we are going to take that gosh darned camera, and we are going to apply it to our player. And now, the main camera is a child of our player object. All I did was pick it up. I'll take it off just to show it again. I took the main camera. I brought it over top of the player so that it gets highlighted in blue like this. I let go. And now the main camera is a child of the player. Now if we run the game, we will see that the camera will follow our player as we spin around and move forwards and jump. Pretty cool. Does anyone have any problems or questions or anything at all? Yes, I can put the code back up again. What part specifically? The jump function? Right here. Nice and big. Okay. Now, of course, this is like a really low-level kind of deal. As you can see, this script that we wrote is just about like maybe 50. Yeah, exactly, 51 lines. Nice and easy. I even put some comments in there. From here, you can create more ground objects like the cubes that I showed you earlier. All of the collisions are already working and going for you. You can create now that you know how to apply things like jumps, you can maybe make like a little pad that when the player touches it, it launches them upwards like a launch pad. You can create things that just apply like really fast speed. You can give yourself, less jumps, infinite jumps as we already have programmed. You can make things like, yes, go down, okay. There is plenty of things that you can do with just this little framework that I've given you guys. Of course, you can change the way that the player looks, so you can make it look like a cube or a capsule. Yes, Adam?
Show them where to change world gravity.
Where to change world gravity. That's in project settings, right? Yeah. All right. So I'll pull the code back up in a second, but we're going to go ahead and change the world gravity. As you see, the player does have a rigid body, and it has a mass, but that isn't really going to change much, and you usually don't want to mess with that. So we're going to go ahead and go into our project settings, and we are going to find the physics, and here, as you can see right here in the little y variable, is gravity, negative 9.81, give or take. If we want to make ourselves jump higher and more floaty, we can go with something like negative 5.81. This will make a change. So we're going to go ahead and save, and then we'll launch our game real quick. And now instead of doing like a hop up and down, we fly. Almost literally. Now make it 30? Yeah, I figured that much. So now we go with negative 30. And keep in mind, our jump speed is like 10. So I don't even... Yeah, so now you've got something that's a lot deeper. I can actually barely move forwards now. I'm holding forwards and gravity is keeping me stuck to the floor.
Yeah. I would just say this is cool to know though, because like game feel is influenced a lot by how fast you rise and fall. So getting a good feel for this in the beginning will help you tweak all your other numbers.
Absolutely. And then of course you've got some things like variable jump height and stuff along those lines that we can probably talk about in a future lecture or like at a meeting or something, like good game feel tips. But yeah. So does anyone have any like pressing questions or anything that they want to ask us? So you're going to go ahead and click Edit in the top left, go down to Project Settings, and then on the Physics tab, Gravity is the first option. I highly recommend only changing the Y one.
You can also probably change this in code.
Yeah,
You can also access the
there's probably some sort of project settings in the code that you can access, but I wouldn't know how to do that offhand.
Trigger when you enter it that passes the gravity. When you activate it, puts it back to normal.
Exactly. Instant gameplay mechanics. All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening and following along if you did. I hope you learned something new. It really wasn't that much. I will be putting this up on my GitHub, and we'll be throwing up all the references later. Thanks, guys.